Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today we will continue our discussion on the concept of deviation. As we started in our last lecture by locating the concept of deviation within the concept of foregrounding, that how the theory of foregrounding as an umbrella term encompasses within it the concept of foregrounding and deviation, and also the concept of parallelism. So, as deviation is the rule breaking or disruption of the normal process of communication, which makes the sensation and understanding of literary writing a sort of prolonged process, which a reader has to go through a sort of difficulty in comprehension and understanding. And also deviation involves interpretation, because something is presented in an unusual way, which is not clear. It's just like interpretation of symbols in dreams. If you want to, understand the concept of deviation more clearly, observe the idea of dreams. When you see dreams, things might be in the symbolic form. You might see images, and you do not really know what the particular image means, what a particular symbol stands for. For example, you see yourself in a dream flying in the air. Now, you do not know what it means because it is deviant, it is unusual, it is what never happens to a normal man. He cannot really fly without any aid in the air. So you want to see what would be the meaning of a dream in which you have seen yourself flying in the air. You try to locate its meaning, or you try to interpret the dream through maybe some justification which is authentic or more believable, as it might be interpreted as a way which is your pursuit of your dreams, as it would be your position in the company where you work, that would be leading to promotion or a raise maybe. Now these interpretations are reached at by associating what flying high in the air would mean. Similarly, if you encounter a deviation in the form of a symbol or an image in writing, you are supposed to interpret it, because it's not obvious. Its meaning is not clear. The meaning is lying behind those images and symbols. So just the way a dream requires interpretation because it presents symbol or image, similarly deviation also it requires a reader that he should make interpretation. So in the last lecture we saw what is the concept of deviation, how is it different from parallelism, and why do writers make use of deviation, and what a reader is supposed to do when he encounters deviation or abnormalities. We looked at a few examples from poetry, and also apart from some serious examples like metaphor or analogy, we observed the neologisms as well, that new coinage of word too is a deviant use of language. So if a rule is broken, why has it been broken? And by breaking of the rule, what does the writer wish to communicate to the reader? So this is how deviation becomes meaningful. This is how deviation becomes complicated and serious issue within a writing, because it would demand interpretation, comprehension from the reader. And the reader encountering the deviation would judge the deviant pattern or expression against the regular, correct and authentic pattern. So today we will see how this deviation, which is a disruption of the normal process of communication, can be analyzed. Then what functions does it perform in literary writing? Why do writers use deviation? What are the reasons that they make their text appear complicated, abnormal, strange, unusual, and they violate the rules? Then we will also look at the significant elements associated with the concept of deviation. So this would be the focus in today's lecture, understanding the concept of deviation, looking at why it is used by the writers and what are the significant elements that the writers use in the deviation. A linguistic deviation is a disruption, or it's a hindrance in the normal process of communication. And linguistic deviations are hindrances because they make the process of comprehension complicated, and also they prolong it. Since a reader encountering a deviation feels that he has never known it before. So, if he encounters something unknown and strange, of course, the comprehension of an unknown and strange thing would take time. It would take effort and energy as well. So, the process of communication is prolonged because of the hindrances that a deviation creates in the reader's comprehension. In linguistic deviation, non-significant, even nonsensical becomes significant, and it demands interpretation on part of the reader. As in the last lecture, we saw the examples of words like authoritis, wholeborough, and grasshopper. Now, those expressions appear to be quite nonsensical, or maybe a bit humorous too, because they were deviant, and they were sort of, you can say, distortion of the regular word or expression, like arthritis changed into authoritis, grasshopper into grasshopper, music room into music room. Now, these disruptions and distortions in the regular words or expressions make us feel that it is strange, it is nonsensical, it is humorous too. But even deviation can be like that. Not always serious or more profounder things are deviant or expressed through deviation, but certain expressions which are there in word blends, neologisms, or certain slips of tongues, they also express the idea that deviation can be used to create humorous effects in a text as well as certain serious or deeper meanings, which deviations would convey to the reader through its authentic and artful use. So, any writer of literary writing may violate conventional literary rules, and in order to convey some idea that he feels should be striking, new, and attractive. So it is a wish or a desire of every writer to make his text appear different, to make his writing unusual. As we have seen that the literary criticism and literary critics, time and again, for example, Eliot comments on the idea that literature survives not only through the following of the traditions and rules, but also through the creativity of each individual author. Now, that is the very point which is more important for literary expression, that literature should carry on the traditions which were there in the ancient times or the classical times or the predecessors. At the same time, it would survive and become reasonably attractive for the readers if each author in every era contributes some novel and unusual and new ways into it. So if the writers keep on writing the same way in which literature has been written since ages, we as readers would get bored. We would become familiar, and the writing would become predictable. Hence, it would lose charm. It would lose beauty. So if the sensation of novelty, newness, if it is associated with a literary text, is to be maintained, then the writers must adopt these unusual and strange ways of giving expression to the thought. So that is the primary motivating force for the use of deviation to the writers of literature. They want to make their writing stand apart. They want to carry on the tradition as well as contribute their individual talent to the writing or the whole literary canon, And that is why deviation becomes focus. Deviation becomes their primary focus whenever they write. Any work of art in some way or other deviates from norms. As our discussion about the artistic expression in painting revolved around the fact that in every era, artists find modes and means of expression in which they make innovations. There was a time when expressionism or impressionism were more in focus. Then the abstract paintings got in vogue. Then the more postmodern way of creating a painting that would be a copy or a sensation or a simulation of reality has been created. Now look at the visual art, how it has gone through movements, changes, and many kind of you can say innovations. If art survival depends upon change, renewal, novelty, literature also depends on the same sensation. And deviation leads to serve this purpose of making literature stay alive because of its novelty, its newness, its individuality, and its difference from what is regular, what is usual, and what is visible. So, linguistic deviations are the abnormalities in expression which appear in the particular piece of writing, and these deviations become foregrounded features. So, deviation is irregularity, abnormality, which leads to arouse the curiosity in the reader, and the reader wishes to make sense of that writing by digging deep into that idea. And then, since it is deviant, it stands out and it becomes the focus or the focal point. Hence, it becomes foregrounded features or the foregrounded regularity. One of the basic reasons for the use of deviation is to renew and refresh readers' perception about the ordinary, familiar, usual things. And by presenting these usual, regular things in a new and interesting way, the writers capture the attention of their audience, the reader. So it is an artful way of bringing the reader back to the work or the text and reading when a writer presents something known, regular, and usual as if we have never ever encountered it before. So, stories and poems might be on the same subjects, issues, and ideas. Human life has got the same issues like suffering, love, loneliness, all these things which human beings encountered has been exploited in terms of themes in multiple writings in every language, because human life hasn't changed much in terms of feelings and emotions, but how literary expression chooses to give expression to that emotion, either of love, loneliness, regret, betrayal, that counts as its style. And its style, if it's making use of foregrounding and deviation, is what would make that idea unique, as if we have never encountered it before. But the reality is that the ideas are more or less the same, which the writers in the past or in the present have been talking about repeatedly in their own way. But every writer chooses a different style, different metaphor, different analogy, different conceit to give expression to something that might be regular and usual. But the way it is expressed, if that is strange and irregular, that makes us feel that this is where the merit of literary art lies. Literary art does not depend on just recreating things the way they have been created earlier. Literary art depends upon recreating something with a unique way, and that unique way usually is deviation. Since deviation is irregularity, abnormality, or a disruption, a reader would find it difficult to comprehend. So what would he do? While reading, he would stop and think on encountering a deviation. It is just like, moving on smoothly on a road, and then you find a speed breaker. So you have to slow down the car, you have to stop, and then move. So if you encounter a red light or a speed breaker that stops your movement and does not make you go further in the same speed or in the same go, it means that you are made to stop and think and let others pass or notice what lies around there. Maybe a school, that is why the speed breaker has stopped you. Similarly, this analogy explains why a writer or a poet would make use of deviation in a text. You encounter a deviation in a text, you feel as if it's incomprehensible, it's nonsensical, or it is unbelievable. You stop over there. It works as a kind of a speed breaker which has stopped your movement through the text. The process of reading was disrupted because while reading something that was regular, you came to encounter something irregular. For example, if you encounter the metaphor that the writer says that, if I use the example of Donne's poem, in which Donne says in one of his sonnets, "O more than moon, draw up not seas to drown me in thy sphere, weep me not dead in thine arms." Now in these lines, you see that Donne has made use of an analogy. He's comparing the beloved with the moon. But instead of regularly referring to the beloved as a moon, he says, "Oh, more than moon." And then associating with the moon the idea that she would drown him in the water, because the moon has the ability to make the sea go wild. So the moon is drowning the poet into its fury, or the waters that would rise due to its being full and bright. And then the idea that the tears of the beloved would work as a sea. Now, the face of the beloved works as moon, the ability to drown in the spheres, and the tears of the beloved work as a sea. Now, this analogy makes us feel that how come a person, in terms of its influence and force, not only on apparent beauty, because it's a metaphysical poem. So the purpose of the poet is to create an analogy or a comparison between the force and power of the beloved over his life, just the way the moon has power and force on the natural phenomena like moving the sea or its waves. So this comparison is irregular, unusual, because mostly poets compare the beloved with the moon in terms of the beauty, the fairness, or the aura that the moon has. Now, Donne has compared it in terms of its influence, its power, its force on his own life. So the poet's own life is regulated just the way a full moon regulates the waves of the sea. So that is how this image becomes strange, unusual, new, and unfamiliar. The reader begins to see what comparison is possible between the two things, the moon and the beloved. So, another example that you can observe for the understanding that would make the idea clear, that you stop and think, and your normal process of communication or comprehension is disrupted. It faces a hindrance. Observe the same example that is of grief ago, because it is a violation of the regular pattern that should have been a year ago. The poet's violation in the form of deviation surprises us, and we judge it against the familiar and regular pattern. We are surprised that why an incorrect expression has been formed. But then, within that abnormality, we find sense, we find meaning, we find depth. That since the person or the persona's life has encountered many sad events. Now those events make up a year or the moment of time for him rather than years, months or hours. So that disruption of communication has made us stop, think, make associations, make interpretations, which led to a comprehension of the whole poem. And this made us realize that how a single deviation might be a focal point within the poem that encompasses the whole sum of the story or the poem, and how this foregrounded feature of a deviation would become the focus of attention for the reader, and it would be connected to the theme and message of the poem. And the theme of the message of the poem cannot be reached to if you do not observe the style, if you do not observe the form. So you locate the form or identify the form of expression either as analogy, conceit or metaphor or simile. Then you see what does it mean, what associations can be drawn with the regularity of expression, and how it is deviant or violating the normal or regular way of expression. So now we are familiar with the concept of deviation with the help of the understanding of its definition and a few examples that we discussed. We looked at that deviation is always something that is a violation, an irregularity. Now the question is, why is deviation used in literature? Why don't the writers express things and ideas in simple terms? If deviation is disruption and irregularity, what is its need? What is its place in writing? There are a number of ways through which the writers make use of deviation, and also there are a number of reasons why the writers deviate from the norms of writing. For example, a writer uses deviation to create unique and new expression, which is associated with the aesthetic value of the literary work. Now, since deviation operates at the level of style first and then leads to meaning, the primary focus of the writer is that he should give expression to his thoughts and ideas in a unique way that would lead to his aesthetic satisfaction that he has done something different from the other authors. It makes the work stand out among the rest of the works or the works of the other authors and even among his own works. And every writer strives to achieve excellence in his work, to make his work unique and different, and this uniqueness and difference in style of writing comes partly through deviation. That would be his style, in which he would create irregularity and disrupt the process of communication that is normal or regular. And the reason that the writers make use of deviation, apart from the fact that they want to make their writing stand out from the rest of the works, is that they want to give aesthetic pleasure to the reader. So the first reason for the use of deviation was about the writer's own satisfaction. That writer wants to stand out as unique and different from among the rest of the writers. That is why he deviates. That is why he makes use of unusual, strange, abnormal structures or expression in his work. The second reason deals with the reader, and that in the sense that the reader has to be the receiver of the text. And if the writer has to attract a reader, he cannot do so if he presents familiar things to him. The reader's curiosity, interest can only be gained if he is presented challenging, unusual, and strange things. So literary writings are meant to give aesthetic pleasure to the reader as well. The writer draws pleasure by creating something unique and new. It gives him a sense of achievement. But what would give pleasure to reader is also very significant. A reader is not reading literature to gain information. That he can do through reading a newspaper. So, if a reader is reading literature, a poem or a story, for the sake of pleasure and aesthetic satisfaction, then the reader's sensibilities are what a writer has to cater to. And reader, as we know ourselves as human beings, that we get bored with regularity. We want change in life. We get easily, bored with things which become regular, usual, or seen. Usually you see that happening in the fashion in clothes too. Why do the designers of clothes come up with new styles in fashion and attire? Why do the movie makers look for ideas that are unusual, either for the sake of cinematography or also from the point of view of expression of a story that might twist the ending or would not lead to the regular expected ending of the story? That is all done for the sake of capturing the audience's attention, as it is human nature that we are all the time in search of a change, and that something that refreshes our sensations and feelings and sentiments is what appeals to us. So that same principle operates for deviation as well. Writers deviate to attract the audience, to keep them glued to the work, to bring them back to the reading. So rather than communicating something plainly and directly to the reader, writers of literature focus on prolonging the process of reading and comprehension of meaning. So a writer's art lies in the fact that how much he can engage a reader in his reading. Now, if a writer has that knack of presenting ideas in a way that becomes attractive and unusual for the reader, he would engage the reader's attention and interest for a longer time. And that would be his achievement, which he would do through the use of deviation. So deviation helps a writer to present ideas in an unusual way, which would make the readers interact with the text, prolong their process of comprehension, and it would make the readers focus and pay attention to the text. And in their reading and comprehension of meaning, they derive pleasure. And that at the end would be the achievement of the writer. Then if a deviation is a disruption of the normal process of communication, where the reader finds difficulty in understanding concepts, where he has to pay attention to the text, where he has to do sort of an exercise or make deliberate effort to understand something, it is filled with a feeling of delight as well, because the reader is decoding something that is coded in unfamiliar terms, as if he's solving a puzzle, as if he's resolving a mystery. So if deviation is a mystery or a puzzle or something that is not apparently clear, the reader would feel a sense of achievement on decoding those codes, on resolving those mysteries, on solving those puzzles. So he would dig out the unusual and strange meaning, and then the composition or the linguistic deviation would become sensible, would become meaningful to the reader. So it is an exercise on part of the reader, because the writer has composed it as if it is covered in layers. Peeling each layer of the deviation would make the reader come closer to the meanings of those deviations. And that is the very process of interpretation and comprehension and cognition of the text, which the writer intended for the reader to perform. Also, deviation makes it easier for the writer to express the inexpressible. Now, this point relates to the writers, that if a writer feels that something in the society is a taboo or something that people cannot really talk about openly due to social, moral, religious, cultural restrictions, he can present that idea through a deviation, because deviation is something that would hide the reality, that would cover the reality. It would make it a bit difficult for people to judge it in a first glance. So if at a first glance the deviation does not give the deeper meaning, the writer can easily get away with the feeling or the idea of criticism. Because if something inexpressible or social or moral taboo or cultural restraint can be expressed through a deviation, the writer can take the advantage of hiding the truth or the reality or his opinion beneath the words. So the deviations are to be dug out as far as their meaning is concerned. So the literary artists choose mostly an artful way to comment upon those issues and ideas which the society does not let them to talk about, and deviation allows the readers to understand the writer's perspective, which might not be given a voice more openly in public due to certain restrictions. So deviations also let the writer expose the reality, but in a subtle and implicit way. And the reader, through interpretation and comprehension, is able to reach to that confined or coded meaning, which is hiding beneath the words. So this is a more complicated and you can say very higher level of deviation, that it is not just an artful expression in literary writings, but it is something that is serving to enlighten the readers about what is inexpressible or what is supposed to be kept hidden. Now, the significance of deviation in literature is that it reinvigorates literature. The literature, if there has not been any novelty, newness, innovation in it, would have become stale and would have lost its attraction. See the present time, where there is so much kind of bombardment of things in the society that we live in. There is internet, there is cinema, there are movies, there are games, there are so many gadgets and modes and means of entertainment which hardly make us get engaged with books or readings that are the usually readings of the text of the works that we study as students. But even if in this time there is a time of technology and communication where other means and modes of expression and communication have become the focus through cables, through computers, through the social networking channels, and even mobile technology, you find that literature still has got appeal. People are writing poetry, people are writing novels, there are bestsellers around. Even the authentic old and classical literature has its value. People quote those literary works and writings in their speeches. Political leaders quote them often. They take inspiration from these things too. Why is it so? It is because of the very fact that literature survives, sustains due to the innovation, due to the experimentation that it keeps on doing. So if literary artists do not experiment with their writing styles, if they do not deviate from the norms, they too might become a thing of the past. So the survival of literature depends on deviation, on innovation, on novelty. So the writers show their individual talent by creating unique ways of expression. Thus, deviation becomes a means through which literature gains new energy. And it is the newness and innovation which leads to the survival and appreciation of art and keeps it from becoming uninteresting, boring, or something that would be lost in the past. So deviation cannot be separated from literary writings. The artful way of communication and disruption of the normal process of communication is necessary. It's a fuel to the very body of the literary work. It keeps it going, it keeps it alive. Now we have come to the very important section of the deviation. We know what deviation is. We know why is it used in literature. Thirdly, we also know what a reader is supposed to do when he encounters a deviation. Now, if we see these three aspects of deviation, we have almost covered the very concept of deviation. But in order to know it further deeply, we have to focus on what are the essential elements associated with the concept of deviation. As deviation is the disruption or irregularity or rule breaking. The two elements associated with deviation are termed by Jeffrey Leach as the element of interest and surprise. So Jeffrey Leach states that any deviation has these two elements within it for the reader. It evokes the interest of the reader. It surprises the reader. So the deviation performs two functions. It has two effects on the reader, which are referred to as its elements. Anyone, as Deitch says, that anyone who wishes to investigate the significance and value of the work of art must concentrate on the element of interest and surprise, then on automatic pattern. So the value of work of art, in our case, literary writing, is to be judged by focusing on how it deviates from regular, normal pattern of language, grammar, and expression. And when it deviates from the regular patterns of expression, it would produce an effect on the reader. And that effect would be the effect in form of arousing and creating the interest of the reader. The first element that is the essential element of deviation is that it creates the interest of the reader. It evokes the interest of the reader in the writing. So when a reader encounters a deviation, he becomes interested to know, what is this? Why is it so? And is it really so? So reader is feeling interested to know. For example, look at that example, a grief ago. You encounter that expression in the poem and you stop and think, and it feels interesting. Grief ago? How come grief ago? Why not a year ago? Well, how interesting it is that a poet has measured his life in terms of the moments of grief rather than the moments in terms of year. Now, you feel that what a unique way of expression. Now, this interest that you felt in the reading of the poem had been due to the use of deviation. So, a deviation, first of all, evokes the interest of the reader. It makes the reader feel a sensation of pleasure as well as a feeling of happiness, that this is unusual, this is different, this is striking or unique. And how interesting it is that it is not what I know before. Now, if it contrasts with what I as a reader know, is what would make me feel more interested to know what is it, what does it stand for now in the present text or the context of the poem. So such a deviation, if that is unusual use of language and expression, it appears appealing to the reader because the reader finds it different. So the very basic reason of the reader's interest in a text or in a deviation is that it appeals to him as different or unusual. So you get interested in buying something that is new or that nobody else possesses. Isn't it so? You want to, bring things as pieces of decoration to your house which you feel that shouldn't be there in anybody else's house. So that same sensation that a human being is motivated to explore what is new, to get what is new and not found or taken up yet by anybody else, is what operates at the back of the concept of deviation too. As a reader, on encountering a deviation in the text, you would be surprised that how is it possible? Now, this interest would lead you to the understanding of the meaning of the text. As Coleridge, in his criticism, has said about literature and art, that the prime merit of literary genius is the presentation of familiar objects in order to evoke freshness of sensation. Here you see that Coleridge has beautifully summarized the very objective and purpose of literary writings. That, as we have been saying repeatedly, time and again, that literature is not meant to inform you only or to communicate you something. It is meant to be felt. It is meant to broaden your aesthetic sense. It is meant to make you feel deeper. Now, if these are the primary purposes of literature, that it deepens your understanding of life, it's make you more sensitive towards life, it broadens your tolerance, comprehension of the world and people, and it enlarges your aesthetic sense, then it is meant to be refreshing the feeling of life about objects that you see around you. So Coleridge's comment that the primary purpose of literary writing is not just representation of reality as it is, but its primary purpose is representation of familiar objects in an unusual way that would evoke the feeling of freshness, as if you have never seen that before. Now, I quote the same example again because you are yet familiar with the same examples that I have been quoting earlier. As we move on to the analysis of poems, we will come up with some new examples too. But here I would like to quote the same example of the compass. When you encounter the analogy or the conceit of compass in Donne's poem Valediction Forbidding Morning, you feel interested to know that how can a geometrical, a mechanical and instrument can be an apt analogy of the definition of love between two people. Because an image that comes to your mind would be that of maybe wind and the river, or the flowers and the fragrance, the stars and the moon. That seem romantic, that seem associated with love poetry. But two legs of a compass, a geometrical instrument made up of a metal, that doesn't seem to give the softer image of the idea of love at all. But your interest evoked through the unusual use of a conceit leads you to surprise again that it is possible. The way a compass is tied together, the two legs of a compass are tied together and the one leg depends on the other. If you have to complete the circle and make a very complete or good circle, you have to keep one leg of the compass firm at a single point. So one lever becomes one leg and the other one the moving leg. And the moving leg cannot come back to the same point to complete the circle if the fixed leg doesn't stay at the same point. Now that analogy, its comprehension, its believable idea makes us feel that how interesting it is and how surprising it is that apparently a very banal or instrument sort of a thing can be used to refer to the idea of love. So Eliot's Coleridge's comment about representation of familiar objects to evoke freshness of sensation is what can be achieved through deviation. Now this comment by Coleridge lays stress on the significance of deviation. That we see that if a writer has the ability to present familiar things in an unusual way, he can refresh the reader's perceptions. He can refresh the reader's sensation and their aesthetic sense too. So, a writer may violate linguistic norms and normal order and expression of communication in order to give a novel idea to the reader and to allow his attention and to allow his attention to roam, to expand, to flourish, and to draw his attention to something that would be interesting, unusual, and difficult. Deviation also leaves a gap in the normal process of communication. Gap means that on encountering a deviation, a reader feels that this is not possible. I know things as they are, but the writer presents them in a way that is unbelievable, so that creates a gap. A common reader may not be able to indicate the gaps or the linguistic connections between the abnormal use of language and the regular use of language. But a reader familiar with the art of writing and literary writing can understand what these linguistic abnormalities stand for. So it is a matter of getting acquainted with such writings. Now you, as the student of literature and writings, can understand all the concept of stylistics better than any layman, because your experience of reading the novels and poems has given you ample enough knowledge that is there in the form of examples that you can quote and understand while we are studying the text or the course of stylistics. So those who are trained in the understanding and comprehension of literary writings, they get a better access to the abnormalities of language or to the deviations in literary writing. So the more you become acquainted and familiar with the text and the writer's style, that they may not present ideas openly or clearly, that they would always make use of some deviant, abnormal structures and language, is what would lead to your understanding and comprehension of such texts. So if a gap is created, that gap cannot be filled by a layman or a novice. It can only be filled by an expert or a person who trains himself with the understanding that these deviations are not to be ignored. They cannot be, overlooked. They are to be interpreted because these are the focal points within a poem or a text. So ignoring those, you may not reach to either the meaning of the poem or text, or you may not even be able to appreciate the style of the poet, the expression of the poet. So understanding of deviation is necessary for appreciation of the style as well as understanding of the theme and meaning of a poem. Now let us observe this example of deviation and see how it creates interest for the reader and how is it also associated with surprise. Now the first element of interest that we are looking at, that it makes the reader get interested, feel interested to know what it is that is unusual and strange, which I as a reader did not know earlier. Observe this example, that is the phrase unreal city, taken from T.S. Eliot's poem The Waste Land. In The Waste Land, Eliot refers to London, the city of London, as unreal city. Now this phrase is complicated and deviant too. For example, unreal as for example on the apparent level means maybe that it would be a fantastic place, something that is imaginary. Unreal is imaginary. Then imaginary or fantastic or unreal thing we believe is perfect or beautiful, or it does not have the impurities or imperfections of reality. Reality is distorted or damaged, and unreality or dream is perfect. Now this is baffling. See that there lies a pun upon the word unreal, that unreal in our imagination may be fantasy or dream that is perfect. But here the writer has used the word unreal, and there is pun upon the word unreal because he presents the pathetic condition of the people of the city of London symbolically. The poet capitalizes the words as well. You can see that U and C is capital. So if unreal evokes on the first glance a feeling that if unreal is imaginary and dream, then it must be beautiful, perfect, fantastic. But the writer is referring to the condition of the society, the European society, the Londoners, that they are corrupt and base and materialistic, money-minded, and pursuit of position, wealth, and honor in the world. That is how they have become unreal. They have become artificial. So the artificiality of the city is embedded in the word unreal rather than its magnificence, its beauty, or its dreamlike perfection. Then, on another level, he doesn't say unreal people. The writer should have used the expression, or would have used the expression, unreal people. The city is not living or breathing thing. It's the people who make the city. It is the people who populate the city, and the city belongs to the people, and they represent it, what type of a city it is. The buildings and landscapes are secondary. The people are who would make the buildings and the landscape as well. So instead of saying unreal people, he says unreal city. It's a kind of a euphemism. Replacing people with unreal makes the expression less harmful or less offensive. Had he said unreal people, we would have found it sort of very direct criticism on the people of London or on the people of Europe, that why has he condemned the people as unreal? But he says unreal city instead of people. It distances the people from the city, and the city stands for the people. So instead of saying that the people are base or immoral, corrupt, or lacking in any humanity, he refers to the city of London as the artificial city. So a reader who reads it is surprised and feels interested to interpret how a city can be unreal. Now the word unreal had the connotations of fantasy and dream and perfection. City makes us escape the responsibility that would be lying on the shoulders of the people who make the city unreal. So look how this small expression, unreal city, is packed with meanings which are achieved through deviation. That is the interpretation on semantic level. See, we highlighted the semantic deviation in the form of euphemism and pun. City replaced with, there are the people replaced with city, and unreal in terms of a pun if it is fantasy. Now look at it graphologically as well. Semantic makeup of the word reveals the meaning of the word that is being referred to through pun and euphemism. If you look at the graphological composition of the phrase, you notice that U and C, the initials of both these words, have been capitalized. Now this capitalization strikes us when we read the poem. Since this has been picked out from the poem and you are looking at it in isolation, if you encounter it in the poem, that captures your attention as the capital letters make you stop and think, why is it so? So the poet, when he capitalizes the first two letters of the writing and he foregrounds it, it is referred to as graphological deviation. And that graphological deviation captures our attention as visual. Now the visual is also captivating us, and this visual captivating us through the capitalization further leads us to ponder over the use of pun and euphemism that would reveal the state of the people of the city more than the landscape of the city. So you see how it surprises us, how it becomes interesting and worth noticing and giving or paying attention to. Now, the second element associated with the deviation is that of surprise. That also is associated with interest. When you're interested to find out the meaning of a deviation, you encounter a feeling of surprise at the same time, because you are surprised that how can this be possible? We were taking unreal, for example, as fantastic or dreamlike, but that unreal had negative connotations because it referred to people who are lifeless, robots, mechanical or materialistic. So it disrupted your understanding of the word unreal. So you were surprised to know that. So the deviations are apparently focusing and focusing on an idea that appears confusing, and they seem strange and abnormal, as these do not fit into the regular process of communication. And as a result, the reader feels surprised on encountering such abnormalities in writing. And what sort of questions does he ask himself? He asks, what does it mean? How is it possible? And most importantly, what is its significance? So, also, surprise is experienced when the reader interprets a deviation. So when as a reader you interpret a deviation, you are surprised that what its apparent reality conveyed to you and what the deeper meanings are. So unreal and city stand for unreal, materialistic people, and not something fantastic or dreamlike, but very grotesque or bizarre or unbearable. So when we find out that the meanings are quite opposite to the appearance of the text, we feel surprised. And what apparently appeared unbelievable or abnormal has a sense or meaning at a more deeper level. So our first impression of a phrase or a deviation, where we dismissed it as incorrect or unbelievable or something usual or ordinary, has been challenged, has been refuted, because the abnormality revealed those meanings which we were familiar with but we did not believe would be there in this phrase that is a pun or a euphemism upon the word. Now observe another example to make the concept more clear. That is from Shelley's poem Ode to the West Wind. Now Shelley in this poem addresses the wind as if it is animate or a human or a presence. He says, O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead. Now the very beginning of the poem, O wild west wind, is a deviation where he has addressed the wind as if it is listening to him, as if it's a person whom he can address and talk to. So as a literary device, it is apostrophe, where he is addressing the wind. The poet addresses the wind as if it is a human being or an animate thing, hence using apostrophe O. Then the element of surprise arises when the poet calls west wind breath of autumn, as if autumn is again some being, and when autumn would breathe or exhale, it would destroy everything that is green, as if autumn is a ghost or a witch or a being that is supernatural or more powerful. So autumn's breath is the west wind that blows in the very beginning of the season of autumn that would lead to winter. Now the animacy granted to these phenomenons, that either wind or autumn, makes us feel surprised that how can autumn be something that can breathe? How can wind be something that can be destructive, like an enemy or a force or a power? So autumn destroys the beauty of spring, and wind is an instrument in the hands of autumn. Wind is used by autumn as it exhales like a being or a witch or a ghost, and lets every leaf or every green thing die, wither. So The poem explains the reader's feeling, how interested we feel to know how can wind be the breath of autumn? How can wind be cruel and be destructive? And its unseen presence, like a witch or a sorcerer, destroys the leaves. The leaves are dead, as if the leaves are living beings who would fall out from the trees and die as people in the battlefield or ground. So this analogy of something that is inanimate with animate things, giving wind and autumn the quality and power of a witch or a sorcerer or a ghost that has power to enchant and mesmerize and kill beings, is associated with the wind and autumn. And the leaves are referred to as dying, as if humans. So look at this, how interesting it is, the process of understanding of deviation. It leads you to peel layers of meaning. It leads you to understand something that you, in the apparent understanding or the first encounter of the deviation, felt that you do not know. Now it reveals those meanings which are quite comprehensible and also authentic, which you justify with the text and your reading. So today we, with the help of a few examples from the poems and literary writings, observe the two very unique elements that are associated with deviation, the element of interest and surprise. That a writer makes use of deviation in a text because he wants to make the reader feel interested in the reading, and he wants the reader to be surprised with an unusual new idea. So today we looked at the functions and elements of deviation. Inshallah, in the next lecture we will observe the various types of deviation with the help of examples, of course, which would make the understanding simpler and easier. Thank you.